All right, welcome listeners to Through the Sightglass, the podcast that dives deep into the fascinating world of craft beer and celebrates the incredible individuals who shape its vibrant landscape. Join us on a journey where we explore the nuances of this amazing industry and the remarkable people who contribute to its richness and diversity. And today, we're sitting down with Paul Arney of Ale Apothecary out of Bend, Oregon. Paul, thank you for making time for us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Great for being here.
So, like we always start, we like to ask where you grew up. Where do you call home? Where was your hometown?
Well, I don't know if I call it home anymore, but I grew up in Everett, Washington, north of Seattle there. Yeah, went to college up in Bellingham.
Fellow Washingtonite.
Yeah, exactly.
First one.
Yep, totally. When I became an official Oregonian, it created a little, some of my friends back home were like, not knowing what they think about me anymore. You know what I mean? And it's like I never really thought about it, but as soon as I got the Oregon driver's license, but then when you become, an official Oregonian.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys understand.
We do understand.
You can see my roots.
The duality has been hard. I
Yeah.
mean, I always just grew up being like Washington and Oregon they are all just one state.
Yeah, that's how I thought about it too, but not everybody thinks that way.
No, some people are very rigid with their lines.
Yeah.
That's for
We've
sure.
lived in both as well, so we understand.
Among many others,
Yes,
it sounds
yes,
like.
yes, many other, for sure.
Yeah. So did you have siblings? Where do you fall in the lineup? Only child?
Oldest child.
Oldest child?
Yep, two younger brothers, yeah.
Nice, so you got all the life lessons.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that goes along with that. Yeah. And so now it's pretty funny because my wife Stacy, who I met up in Bellingham, right? She's an oldest child. We have two kids, so our oldest boy is also an oldest child, which means three out of the four in our family, we're oldest children, right? And that leaves Haley, our daughter, kind of just being like, "What the hell, you guys? Like, you do your thing." It's pretty funny.
The only one in her category.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're both middles. So,
that's adorable.
Yeah.
That's been fun too. I think it's always a fun question because there are people that I've worked with where I didn't know how many siblings they have, but I'm like, that's younger brother mentality, or that's like middle sister stuff. And come to find out, it's like, still got it. Spot on.
Yeah, family origin stuff's real. Like, that stuff is real.
Absolutely.
It is very much so.
Are any of your siblings, are they in the industry or no?
Nope.
Okay.
No. We're all into music. We all do music, but I was the only one that went into the alcohol production business.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And your parents, are they in the industry at all? Are they musicians as well?
Well, this is probably a nice little segue.
Yeah.
So the name of the brewery, the Ale Apothecary, Dad, and then on my mom's side, Grandpa and Great-Grandpa were all druggists. They all had little drugstores.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad was a pharmacist, growing up with, and, like having that kind of lineage on both sides of the family is kind of weird. First of all, so there was a lot of, I was going to different pharmacies when I was a kid, and so part of this whole production for this brewery was to create a space. Like, I tripped out on this kind of stuff. So the word apothecary actually means shopkeeper. The root word was shopkeeper and kind of got associated with the chemist who put things together to help people feel better and all that.
Yeah. Like different ailments and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it was all stuff that was local, right? It's like they knew where to gather shit. And so for me, like, to be making this brewery with this intention of keeping it super small, the word apothecary was very apt because it was like I was going to be the guy behind the counter. It was going to be very small. I was a shopkeeper. I was the guy sweeping the floars, moving pallet jack, right?
Yeah.
So it was very intentional. It also kind of linked to this funny little thing in my family, right? It's like,
nice.
So, like the display cabinet.
Yeah.
My roll top desk, and we've got, in the bathroom, I've got wallpapered with prescriptions my great grandfather filled for beer during Prohibition.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
He got,
wow.
Which is
so
just
awesome.
such a trip. It's like,
That
because now we're living through this age where you had to get that for marijuana.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, it's just kind of funny to see beer, 2 dozen
So
bottles,
he
take as directed.
would write for beer? He
Well, he wasn't the doctor. He was a prescription guy. He was a
Prescription.
pharmacist. So, the doctor would write the prescription, right? And all this was to get around. I mean, it's just same as weed, right? It's like, of course, some of this stuff, right? It's like, this is probably going to work. It's probably make you feel better. But the real way, it was just a way to get around the law.
Yeah.
And so, it's just funny. The doctor would be like, beer, 2 dozen bottles, take as directed.
That's
take it to
so
my great-grandfather.
And he would sell them.
And he would,
Did he brew the beer too?
Well, no, he didn't brew the beer.
Okay.
No, that would be super interesting.
That would
to
be
know,
interesting.
Like, where did the beer come
was it
from?
made on site, or
Who
was it like
made
Schlitz or something that came in?
Well, because during Prohibition, right, somebody must have been allowed to make it, right?
Yeah.
And I know Coors wasn't. Like, we had some of the, one of these mortar and pestles that we got, my mom kept it, and it's stamped with Coors, because Coors used to, when Prohibition happened, they moved into making ceramics.
Oh, wow.
So, like, from our little iodine tester is actually this funny little ceramic piece that my mom found that was made by Coors too, right? And so they made a lot of ceramics. You know, they were able to segue and do other things.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's so wild.
That's always a funny part. That's a big part of Prohibition is when they just denied everybody alcohol. So many people like having withdrawals and then started acting more violently than before when they were drunk.
Interesting.
That was part of why all of a sudden was like, oh yeah, like, and it was like you said, alcohol was able to cure a bunch of ailments, but cure,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
So-
Totally.
yeah. But it was a funny bit during my dive into Prohibition history. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, all of a sudden like nobody can drink, and so all the sober people were like, yeah, good for you. Well, now you have all these like withdrawing alcoholics that are like,
acting crazy.
oh, yeah. Yeah. Where
That's wild.
where was your family's pharmacy or drugstore?
So I grew up in Everett, and so my dad had the Silver Lake Pharmacy.
Okay.
Which is just like, I guess it'd be North Everett. No,
Okay.
sorry, South Everett. It's been a long time. And then my mom's side of the family, she grew up in Cooley City, Washington, which is this very tiny little town on the edge of Dry Falls. You know, it's really dramatic out there. It's super beautiful, but super small town. You know, and so they had, you know, this little business in this tiny little town on, you know, the very end of the Wild West, right? Late 1800s is when Great Grandpa started it. You know.
Wow.
You know, and so it's kind of cool those elements being in there. They also, like, you know, when my grandpa took over, he got the very first liquor license in the state of Washington when they went to this standardized system, and so he was actually legally allowed to sell alcohol out of the pharmacy.
Gotcha.
That's
the
wild.
first location in Washington. Like, it's
Yeah.
just like
Some very small
so I
lumber
guess,
town.
I'm not the first one in the
Yeah.
alcohol business, so
Yeah.
I can take that part back.
There you
I
go.
like that.
Yeah.
No.
But immediate family, that makes
Totally,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, that's so wild.
Yeah. And if there's young listeners listening, drugstores also sold, like, it was kind of like a general store. You had, like, toys and other things in there. I mean, I remember growing up, we used to watch Little House on the Prairie a lot. I grew up Mormon. So that was certain shows you're allowed to watch. But the drugstores always had, like, you had your pharmacy, but you also had, like, candies, and you had little toys.
Yeah,
And
comic books, soda fountains back in the
Soda
old days.
fountains.
That's right,
you
soda
know, Like, that
fountains.
was before my time as a soda fountain, but when I was a kid, we'd go get, you know, the comic books from Grandpa and all that stuff.
Nice.
You know, balsa wood airplanes.
Mm.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
I think he sold, like, shit like toasters and pots and pans.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
you know,
random
Kind of like the
assortments.
market store nowadays. I
yeah,
feel like.
yeah.
Because we go to the market store for stuff, and they always have, you know, milk and eggs and
Totally.
other things that you need.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
I like that. So some inspiration from your family that maybe
I'm
now.
trying to connect the
You're
dots,
like,
you
I'm
know, trying hard.
connecting.
You know, it's so funny because, you know, having some of these old pieces, I don't want to get rid of them, but they don't really fit in today's world, right? I have this big roll top desk, and what I do is I roll it up and I put my little laptop and open that up, and that has everything in it. I don't need any of the drawers,
Yeah.
but they're all full of
Those
shit.
are- yeah.
You know, they're just full of, you know, like
Yeah.
we'll just stuff it. That
Become
way
a
now.
storage.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty funny. But no, it's nice to be able to have. It's nice to be able to have those connections. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Everett.
Grew up
what
in
did
Everett.
what moved you from Everett? What did you do between high school and?
Okay,
from
so, yeah.
there?
So basically, went to college directly after high school. This is we got an 18-year-old son, and we're trying to encourage him not to do that unless he really wants to, because you know, I didn't even know there was another option, right? So directly into college, went up to Bellingham, went to Western, awesome place where I met my wife. But when they told me I had to pick a major, I was like, oh, really? Okay, well, I like being outside. Geology sounds rad. You know, I didn't even think about like what kind of job.
Having it to be a job after.
You know,
Yeah.
and so basically got a degree and then found out, you know, jobs are like desk jobs, or, you know, you're working for a mining company or an oil company or something, or the USGS. And I was all like, none of those sound all that fun. And, right. And so went to work at a coffee shop, pretty classic. And then I met this guy named Tom Munoz, who was living and working in Everett as the brewer at Glacier Peak at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool because he'd come in and get coffees, and, you know, I had been a home brewer with my dad a little bit. I think the family got him a homebrew kit,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
and so we made
Christmas or something.
exactly, yeah, his birthday, something.
Yeah.
And it was fun, you know, like it was extract stuff,
Yeah,
but it
yeah,
was
like the
time with
syrups.
dad, and and everything was plastic, you know. But it was fun, and so then. And of course, you know, like, maybe I shouldn't say of course, but my family, like, at get-togethers and stuff, there's just a lot of beer being consumed, right?
Yeah.
As a kid growing up, you're just like, one thing I know when I'm going to get older is I'm going to be able to drink beer like all my other relatives.
Yeah.
Right? It's one of these things. You know, family reunions, it's always beer, right?
Yeah.
Can't say it was always the best beer. But, you know, I was able to, like, in college, you know, we were starting to learn about craft and stuff like that. And so home brewing and that, it's like, oh yeah, you know. So, and then when I met Tom, and he was the brewer at the local brew pub, right?
Yeah.
He was cool enough to let me shadow him and see what he did.
That's sweet.
And help me figure out that I could take some of my college credits and transfer them to UC Davis for the Master Brewers program.
Oh,
Okay.
awesome.
So at that point, it was like, you know, getting out of college and working in the coffee shop, it's like, you know, what the hell now, right? Like,
Yeah.
But then it worked into this beautiful little thing, right? The window opened, and I was able to take it, and the wife and I had driven around the country. I had the van, and so I sold the van and paid for my tuition into school and
Nice.
and did the extension program, which was only like 6 months
Okay.
long. It was really targeted at passing this exam, that IOB, you know,
Yeah.
Institute of Brewing exam. But it got my foot in the door, right?
Yeah.
And so right before finishing school there, you know, back then it was just the Celebrator beer news, you know, it was
okay.
it was like a, you know, paper.
Like newsletter or something.
Yeah,
like the Volcanic
exactly.
or something, or like Portland Mercury.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And it was the only one, but in the middle they had all the states with all the breweries listed.
Okay.
Right. And so I went through, maybe not all maybe it did have all the states. It was broken. I just remember going through and finding Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And I wrote like 300 little letters saying, hey, you know, this is what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And I got 2 responses.
Nice.
Out
Nice.
of like all the, right? I mean, it's like you'd think maybe there'd be more, but really it was like kind of shocking. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know, one of them was from this tiny little brewery in Roslyn. Maybe you guys been through Roslyn. Awesome old town. It's awesome. They have like the oldest bar in Washington.
Oh, wow.
It's a cool little spot.
Oh, awesome. We'll definitely have to check that
Yeah,
out.
I mean, so the Roslyn Brewery, which hopefully is still there and hopefully still functioning. If it is, it has the same guy that wrote me that letter, because he was like, "Thank you for this letter. I'm never hiring anyone. Good luck in your brewing."
Oh my!
You know what I mean?
You got a response
But
back though.
he was cool, and
That was nice.
it was encouraging, right? It was like, in a way,
Yeah.
you know,
Encouraging-ish.
ish, yeah. And the other letter was from Dr. Bill at Deschutes Brewery here in Bend.
Oh, okay.
And my buddies and I, through college, one of them had a place in Sun River, so we'd been through here a few times, and had a really good memory of me and my wife sitting at Deschutes Brewery in the old days, drinking beer and talking about how cool Bend was. And so when Dr. Bill was like, "That'd be great, you know, come on down." And I was
Awesome.
like, "Hey, Bend.
Yeah.
And
how lucky is that?"
That is, I mean, honestly, 300 letters and you end up in Bend.
Yeah.
And that's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it, you know, and also it's like just to not know really anything, and to come into that particular brewery at that time, right?
Yeah.
It's like, because Deschutes was right at the beginning of this, like, they were just the shit.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it was the, you know, and everything was manual, and like the culture there was like very pro brewer as a craft, not brewer as an operator. And the brewers were really responsible for the quality of the beer, because the company was so young and dynamically growing. There wasn't an organizational structure in there to manage things. So it was the brewers who were kind of in charge of quality control and how things went, right? It was kind of up to us to make sure that things happened, and it wasn't management level. And it was just very exciting. You know, you learned a lot, and you saw a lot, and it was, you know, ups and downs, but it was the timing. I just can't get over the timing.
Yeah,
it
timing.
was really awesome.
Well, I mean, you planted the seeds. I mean, you and your wife sitting down there, that Lily just threw it out to the universe, and the universe was like, absolutely,
Totally, here
Ben,
you go.
get to start.
Yep.
Yeah. And that is funny, too, because it's such an old dogma of, back then it's like, a brewery was a business, but it's like the brewers and everybody else was left to dictate how well the beer actually turned out. And there was information out there, but a lot of it, too, is just you learn from other people and you learn from mistakes. And so I always just laugh, because I would hear stories from all of my mentors of being like, oh, yeah, like when we were like first bottling, we learned that you really should measure your sugar. It's not just like, this looks like the right amount when it's like, you know, can conditioned bottle
Which sounds kind of ridiculous. Right? Yeah, you're just like, how could you possibly do that?
Yeah, I still remember at 7 Seas when they were teaching me how to dose caustic. We didn't, at the start. They probably have it now, but they did not have caustic testing strips. So
Dudes.
they were just like, look at this color. They're like, yeah, that looks good.
That looks good. Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah, about this much.
Yeah. Or that's too light orange. You need a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and a lot of that stuff, I mean, oh my gosh, it's like, you know, I understand with time that's gone by and maybe a little bit bigger picture, and especially now owning a business in this word, whatever liability means.
Yeah,
right?
true.
You know, it's
True.
like, holy crap, there was some stuff that went down. Yeah. And, you know, it actually has given me quite a bit of appreciation for the actual regulatory side of things, because sometimes, you know, these breweries, businesses, you know, especially like ones that are you know, akin to factories, that require chemicals, that require machinery. It's like quick growth can lead to some pretty dangerous situations if they're not you know, kind of monitored a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But you know, being young, and I remember, like, I mean, just one really funny thing is one of the old brewers came in through there with his motorcycle through the cellar. You know what I mean? It's just like crazy shit.
Yeah.
Like Wild West of brew days.
So that stuff now is like, okay, you can clean the whole cellar now. You can disinfect everything. Yeah.
I bet you have some crazy stories. Is there something that like stood out to you that kind of you either still use today in the brewery or in your business that you learned back in Deschutes? Is there something?
Oh,
that
there's
really...
a lot of stuff. But I mean, I mean, really, like my adherence to the, you know, Deschutes was all, and I think they still, for the most part, use whole cone hops. You know, I think they use some other things for bittering sometimes, but in general, they probably still use a fair amount of whole hops.
Well, right on.
And back in the day, they only used whole hops, and you know, that's one of the things I've taken from that is this idea that the raw materials in their purest raw state are their least processed version are the things that I am more attracted to. You know, the closest I can get to the, you know, the farm, right? It's like whatever you can get without processing it too much. You know?
Absolutely.
You know, and then bottle conditioning. You know, what you talked about with the sugar. Like, thanks to Dr. Bill, like one of the first things I learned there was this. We were bottle conditioning everything. And Dr. Bill was very aware about that. He wrote some papers, so I was introduced to that super early. And, you know, doing the natural carbonation thing here has been very instrumental.
Yeah, I'm sure there's so much that you learned from there. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I couldn't even put it all down.
Yeah, definitely. So
even just for like, I mean, even stuff not related to brewing, right? You show up for your first day, and within a week or two, your new friends who you're trying to, you know, fit in with are saying stuff like, Arnie, dude, you really got to buy a house. And I'm like,
gosh.
They're so expensive. They're like almost $100,000.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you serious? You know, you got to buy a house. You got to buy a house.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
it's like, well, thanks,
Yeah,
fellas.
thank you.
Yeah, back in 98, 99.
Yeah.
Thanks for that tip.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, definitely.
Absolutely.
So where did you first start to think that you wanted to have your own place? Like, what was that story, and how did you get from Deschutes to here?
Okay, well, so the way that it went at Deschutes back, so I worked there from 96 to 2002, 2003. And at that time, my wife and I turned 30, and we didn't have any kids, and we saved one of our salaries for an entire year, and we're like, we're quitting and traveling. And so we quit our jobs, and we traveled for a year and a half, and traveled interior Mexico, did the Alcan, Europe, and Asia.
It was awesome.
It was really life-changing. It was very monumental.
Oh, wow.
And so when we came back, we had the house. We rented it out while we were gone, and when the trip was over, we came back. And to be perfectly honest, we had dreams, much like you lovely people. You know, we're gonna learn to write and take pictures and do travel stuff, and just shit happened, and the mortgage, and I mean, it's hard to kind of see through the fog of history anymore.
Yeah.
But I needed to get a job, you know, and so I got a job back at Deschutes Brewery, and it was so wild because I had worked for, you know, this one brewery for a certain amount of time, and known all these people and how the structure worked and all that. And during the time I was gone, a huge shakeup happened, right? Your master brewer got fired, and a lot of the brewers quit or got fired, and sales department changed. I mean, it was like all that stuff we were talking about earlier about needing an organizational structure, right? The business got to a point where Gary had to have, you know, a structure. Right. Because they were making so much beer and had so many employees. Like, things had to work in a way where you couldn't just rely on somebody to do the right thing or to, things had to happen. which I totally get and I honor. And so when I went back, it was new master brewer, basically a whole new brew crew. There was only a few people left that I was associated with. And so I got a job as a brewer, and they had installed a 250-barrel fully automated Hoopman brew house, right? And so the one that I was familiar with was like a 50-barrel JV, which is all manual.
Yeah.
It took 2 brewers.
Yeah. Lots of valves.
Lots of valves, sliding down the spiral staircase and hollering to your friend, open it, okay, all that shit. And it was, honestly, it was quite exciting because it was like, that brought 3 different sized breweries to that brewery. We still had the pub downtown, 10-barrel, pub brew house, and then we had the 50-barrel JV, and then the 250-barrel Hoopman. It was exciting, right? All this stuff happening, and so I went into that, as a shift brewer, and it was great. Made new friends, some of the old people. It was great. Yeah, what we needed. As time went on, I worked myself into assistant brewmaster, responsible for research and development.
Oh, nice!
Fucking awesome! It was like a dream, right, for that brewery at that time.
All the fun projects come your way.
Yeah, and I was basically stationed down at the pub. So like my work day was, instead of me going to the factory, I got to go to a pub, and with the factory kind of salary, and I would go to the big house for meetings and stuff, but help brewers, develop their own beers at the pub. We do research and development projects. It was really great.
Nice. That sounds awesome.
And we had at the time we had an assistant brewmaster in charge of brew houses, and an assistant brewmaster in charge of the cellars, and then research and development. So there's 3 of us.
Yeah.
And this next move was totally understandable, and I don't want it to come out sounding like this was the reason, like I was angry for the company doing this, because if the master brewer wants all his assistant brewmasters to know the job, right? And so what his goal was to rotate assistant brewmasters around.
Right.
Totally understandable.
Right.
For me, though, right, here I was like, my whole life was dedicated to the craft and brewing, and being involved in, these dynamic, the microbiology and the beauty of the craft,
Yeah.
And they wanted to move me into the assistant brewmaster in charge of the cellars, which instead of any brewing, it was all like spreadsheets and budgets and staff and, the windowless office, in the bottom of the cellar. Like it just was not, it just wasn't something I could do.
Yeah.
And so I had to gracefully bow out. They were awesome. We gave each other quite a bit of time. I had about 3 months. But we had also just bought this property. So that 3 years earlier, we bought this property up Skyliners, so a few acres on the creek. We built this little house. But, kind of one of the caveats, was like, don't worry, Stacy, we can manage it. Because it was kind of a financial stretch, even though we had bought a house in town. And, we kind of used our leverage and we moved up in the world. But it was
so tight.
It was super tight.
Yeah, narrow margins.
Very narrow. It was, and I do remember distinctly saying, don't worry, Stacy, I'm working at Deschutes Brewery. This is a great salary. Deschutes Brewery isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then one day I come home and I'm like, I get
They're
notice.
They're not going anywhere, but I am.
Yeah. And it wasn't one of those things. Like I probably should have. It's hard to say should have. I hate the shoulds. But it might have been kinder to Stacy if I would have brought the news home and said, hey, this is what's going on and this is how I feel. Yeah. How do you feel about me giving notice?
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I kind of felt like, I was kind of blindsided, and I was like, you know what? I think this is time for me to say goodbye, and blah blah blah. Yeah. So I made the decision before I left. So brought the news home, and she's like, "Excuse me," So because we had Spencer at that point, and our son, and say, hey, actually we had both the kids at that point. So it was a real deal. It was big time stuff. So I had basically 3 months to figure my shit out. And what was just rolling through my mind was this is really the only career job I've ever had, the only skill I really know. And it's like, how can I solve this problem? And it was like, looking to the past and what makes this craft so unique and what do I find exciting about it? And a lot of it had to do with history. It had to do with a sense of place, had to do with this idea that beer is a natural product, just like wine and cheese and bread and all these other historical things that we consume, and it's like, maybe if I tie a brewery to our place, if I tie these two things together, maybe we can keep the property.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so that was kind of the instigation for starting the Ale Apothecary. Was like,
Gotcha.
you know, it was kind of dramatic moment. You know,
Yeah.
like I had to pull the money out of the 401k, and you know, it was jumping off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting times.
That's the only way to find out, honestly. I mean, I listen to a ton of, I wouldn't say motivational podcasts, but definitely when I'm need some motivation, listening to people that talk about how their businesses grow.
Yeah.
And it's like they always say, you don't know until you know, and you have to just sometimes fling yourself out there to find out.
Yeah.
And because that's when your instincts kick in of like, okay, if this is what I'm doing, how do I survive? How do I bring in money? And so,
it's true. It's very much like jumping off a cliff without wings.
Yeah.
Like running and jumping and just being like,
It's a wild but beautiful process.
Yeah.
Trust me, when I was washing kegs, my mom, I dropped out of community college. I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I also didn't know trade schools existed. This was 2010, though.
Yeah.
But, so my mom was like, yeah, this seems like a good hobby, but you could also like do other things, get a job that pays more. And I just had to show her and tell her, be like, Mom, there's something about this, what I do in this industry that like makes me feel alive. It's like, I don't get paid that well, but I also don't feel like I work a day in my life.
Right, yeah.
And over the years, she's like, I get it now because, I mean, love my mom and she's my biggest role model and stuff, but she's worked jobs too where like it pays well, but it sucks her soul every single day. And it's like, I never want to live like that.
Yeah.
You know, if that's one thing I know, I can't do that. And
Yep, well, it seems like you're doing a pretty good job there.
Yeah.
We're figuring it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, day by day.
I don't think that ever stops.
I don't think so either.
I really don't.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing when you realize, we were talking about this actually the other day, how your parents, you look at them as like superheroes, they know everything. And then as you get older, it's like, oh, they're just like us, just older.
Yeah, exactly.
They're literally making the same mistakes, figuring shit out, failing, being scared to death. You know? So,
no, I imagine that like the van life thing, what you guys are doing is a good way to avoid this whole destination mindset sometimes that, you know, I think you can get stuck into. It's like thinking that, you know, oh, once I get to this level, this place, whatever, all these other issues that I have are going to go away. And that's not.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think that's like a lot of people I've worked with, and even myself. I thought that, I got really good at packaging. And when I was at Freem, I was running some of the teams over there under Simon, and I was like, okay, and from here I want to go to brewing. And then I didn't take that step due to COVID, but went to Fort George and did weekend cellar management. And I was like, awesome, one step closer. And then I realized, though, that the transition was that I wasn't going to be able to do any of the R&D brewing, which I wanted to do something small. I wanted to do these creative things, and I had yet to learn that, when you've been here for a little bit, then you get to do that creative stuff.
Right,
even if I don't think that train of, like, it should follow that way, I understand because most of these people had been there 5 to 8 to 10 years. They were now doing the R&D stuff, and it's like, okay. So then I went into production brewing. And I like that, but similar. I was like, I'm brewing now, I'm a brewer. And I was like, why don't I feel this feeling of like elation? Like I've met my goal. And it still is like striving forever to do more. And so that's why it's like, now I think having like a microbrew set up to kind of do creative stuff. And also we do brewery consulting. So if somebody's having like wort efficiency issues, it's like, come on our 5-barrel system and let's run your recipe and see what's going on. And we can match this to your sheet and see what's missing and what we can figure out.
We don't have that yet.
That's our future goal. That's where we're headed.
That's super cool.
So but it kind of reminds, that like something about having land and building your business on the land that you have, like that's something that we think about a lot. So what did that look like for you and your wife? Like how did y'all get started? Do you have to like build another facility portion on your property? Like bring in equipment? Like how did you do that? Like how did you?
I didn't know at the time, right? You know what I mean? It's just like talking about all this stuff. It's like I knew how to make beer, and that was about it. And so like this little house, like we had a 450 square foot living space with a loft above it, you know, and there was no real bedroom, and we also had a 500 square foot garage. I took the garage. And, you know, like...
That's where Ale Apothecary began.
Well, I mean, it's still there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's still there. I mean, and that was actually the commitment. It's like the brewery was going to always stay there, right? And so we did add on in 2017. So I did create a little bit more space. So the brew house is now more like 800 feet.
Gotcha.
We have an actual separated space for the fermentation from the brew house. You can actually see through that little doorway by those fooders is the new section.
Oh, right on.
But yeah, that picture makes it look quite a bit larger.
Little more
It's like,
panoramic.
total pano. And I think it was honestly one of probably the most enjoyable parts about this whole experiment was that total unknown. And at that point, I did have money in the bank because I pulled it out of the 401k. And just to start in a lot of ways with a blank slate, but it was a blank slate that had definite boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I've learned that's helped me in so many different areas of my life. Like having a blank slate with no boundaries. So like sometimes working into shoots when you could just basically have anything you wanted.
Yeah.
Or at least when I was there for some of the R&D stuff, it could make things a little hard to focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, where do you go? Where do you start? But for me, like I found it was easier for me to find my true creative inspiration when I had distinct boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like with space, with money, with equipment, with everything. All these things put in these parameters that gave me a little kind of safe space to operate. Right. And here, like, I didn't want to define the beer, and I didn't want to be the one defining anything. I wanted to learn as this process went. Right. It's like all the beer styles that we talk about all started in a place where a brewer, probably a woman, had access to a certain type of water, certain type of raw materials, certain yeast, right? And they brewed the best possible thing they could, and that was what they drank. And then it got associated with that place, and you're like, it's a Burton Pale Ale. Or, you know what I mean? It's like they all came from a place.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited because it's like, being up in the woods like that, what are the yeast like?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's yeast everywhere, and they're probably coming the trees over here, sappy, who knows?
Yeah.
But it just was super exciting because it was like, oh, I get to set all these, my parameters, and one big one was, it was going to be wild beer because we were on a septic system, and it drove me nuts learning about our food industry and how many chemicals we use, talking about caustic and stuff. That was such a mind fuck, learning the amount of chemicals that our breweries use to create beer. It was something that just for me as a person, I didn't like.
Yeah.
I don't like.
Especially living in such a beautiful state.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's hard. And it's not just Deschutes, it's not just beer, it's literally all these things we buy that we put in our bodies.
Yep.
We don't really know how they're made. And so this is all part of this kind of thing, is like, I want the Ale Apothecary to be like a test case to see if we can make something of value. I called it invisible marketing, right? Because at the time it was all this, everything was starting out like, these high-end beers, these beers, that were made in a certain way, like all this integrity. And, you'd hear things, oh, so-and-so does it like this, or they say they do it like this and whatever. And it's like, you know what? Like, if I want to keep my brewery super small, I'm going to try to do everything the most, everything's the most, right? We're going to bottle condition from straight still beer with honey because we can get those, all the ingredients are going to be local. They're not going to be mined out of the ground. You know what I mean? It's just like, where can I take this and how can I stay true to my ideals and make this kind of more like an art installation than an actual business?
Yeah.
Can I, will it work as a business if I do all the right things in my mind, right? So I was kind of thinking that if I made this product, all that would just be self-evident. I wouldn't need to hire a salesperson.
Yeah.
I wouldn't need to put beer in kegs to get on draft because that's going to increase how much money we have to bring in every month, right?
Yeah.
We have to get a keg washer and manage kegs and sell the bars and deliver and stuff. And it's like, no, I want to make this product and see if I can do it in this way.
Yeah.
And so it was very exciting, to open that door and kind of see what I bumped up against. And that's what we do all the time now. We bump into these, what I call growth governors, like we do an overnight mash, right? It's like we can only brew really maybe 2 beers a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's all these things that I built into it to prevent the brewery from growing when I was still in that hyper-focused, very idealistic phase before the business pressures could be like, well, maybe I should just make it so we can do this if necessary. And I didn't have to worry about that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been fun.
It's very much your vision. I will say that Ale Apothecary is. I heard that it was there's nothing more true to Oregon, especially like you do a lot of wild ale, spontaneous fermentation. I would even say old historical style. It's like you're not going to find anything better than Ale Apothecary, and it also speaks true to like what Oregon is, and also who you are behind it, Paul, and the rest of your crew. And I think that's super valuable. Like you say, those growth governors, you see a lot of people start to, I think, change kind of like their creative vision and their values because they think that this will ease stress, this will make things better. In some ways, they do, but then in some ways, you get further and further away from the original reason, like why you started, why you chose beer as a medium to produce these things and use, a lot of local ingredients and, to carve out wood logs and put, juniper and pine boughs and run. And that's stuff people weren't doing. And it's a true homage to what this is. It was a big inspiration for me. I was stoked to sit down and talk. So I just want to say, I think your vision has stayed for a long time, and a lot of people recognize it.
I appreciate that. Makes my day, dude. Well, more than my day. It's weird to be in that, like, because I think initially I started it to like make it work for me and my family. Sometimes looking back, it feels very selfish because I wasn't thinking about the consumer at all. I was like, how can I make this work for me, my family, and to do this thing? And basically, me being kind of an introvert is like, oh, if I could stay up here in the woods and make beer. God, what a great life that would be.
That's probably a lot of brewers' dreams.
Totally. I will say the optics look like that, but that is so not the way that it's ever really been. There's times when I get to stay up there for, a few days on end. I'm like, oh yeah, my commute's super short and all that.
Yeah. You've done a good job too, I think, of also showing that this is a business that can survive doing it the way that you want to. We had the pleasure of talking with Trevor over in DeGard.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And hearing his process and story is very similar. And I think it's, because for a while, a lot of it was, if you were going to start a brewery, even during the craft beer boom of, from like 2006 up until, I want to say, around 17, 18, I think is where it really started to level off. Breweries had creative ideas, but they all really looked similar. They all looked the same. And I think now this whole niche of, very creative, artistic style of beer that is very different is proven that it's sustainable and it grows, and it can grow really well. It's not going to grow as fast as others, but to that caveat, you can continue to do what you want to do. And I think that's probably what a lot of brewers lose is as things grow, the creative freedom that they once had. They're like, oh, okay, now we just have to keep on the regimen of having these core beers and filling these orders, and maybe we can have time for like 2 or 3 fun projects that we want to do.
For sure. And I mean, to be honest, this last year has been interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the security that you're kind of talking about is something I felt up to COVID. We did fine during COVID, but man, I'll tell you, it's not the same way it was. We're doing things where I'm brewing clean beers now, and we're doing it with our own yeast. So we had isolated, right? It's like, but it is like I've got a couple cylinder conicals up at the brewery now. We put things in cans. We're reducing our prices on certain things. Like it isn't. I think there's just so many factors involved, right? I think if it was just White Claw or seltzers, or if it was just the alcohol in cans, or if it was just the market saturation, or if it was just the kids who are kind of not drinking or not really into beer and see beer as kind of like, the older generations thing. There's just so many things going on that it's hitting breweries of all shapes, sizes, everybody. You know what I mean? I mean, I shouldn't say everybody. I'm sure there's some that are probably just doing fine. But most of the breweries I talk to at some level are like, we gotta really think about how we're doing things. We can't, it wasn't, because there was a period in time there where, I couldn't have grown the brewery haphazardly just like as much as I wanted, ever, and that doesn't make sense with a product like this. But there was a time when I could sell everything. I knew where it was all going. And nowadays it's like the things have changed quite a bit, and it's like, I feel really fortunate we have this tasting room because initially when I started the brewery, we didn't have a public space. I was just working on distribution, and because at this time the interest was really on these types of beers, we had accounts, long-term accounts that came and visited me at the brewery. We're like, sure, yeah, we'll sell you beer. Yeah, you came to the brewery. This is great. So we worked out deals, and our beer was going to Europe and going to China and going to Canada and going all over the place. Even though I was making like the smallest amount of beer, and it for the model that I wanted, it was working, right? It was allowing me to keep the brewery super small. It was getting the word out in a way. We were selling the beer. There was demand, all that. Well, in the last couple of years, with the things changing and the market saturation, people can get these beers closer to home, you know, and because I haven't been doing much marketing, that kind of thing, right? There's a lot of people who don't, I mean, brewers and people in the industry, like, I feel so fortunate. I feel like that punk rock band that, like, I feel like the Velvet Underground, you know? It's
100%.
like, you know what I mean? It's just like, I feel so proud of that role. And that's why I'm not the best, like, I don't love the business element. And that's really where I need to be focused now. Like, I need to be figuring out how to make sure that we maintain what we're doing going forward, because we do have and I'm getting off track now. I think I started that on something. I wanted to make a point about.
It's kind of like talking about the post-COVID market, kind of like how, you know, consumer base is buying and all that has changed. I think it's just never evolution. I think is what you're getting at is that
there's lots of changes from all different sizes of the breweries.
Yeah,
totally. Yep.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, I had a short stint at Belmont Station, which I loved.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I was there for about 6 months, and it was always funny. I will say this, and I love the people at Belmont Station, and I've talked to the managers, so I can say this online. They buy too many beers, and they need to have more storage because, sometimes the rotation stuff would sit on the warm shelf that's not supposed to be there.
Sure,
But that from my experience, because dealing with the bottle shop, dealing with consumers. People that were really into natural wine, it was super easy to be like, check out Ale Apothecary, check out DeGard, check out, you know, the Refren, check out these funkier things. That'll be right up your alley, and getting them to teach. But I also noticed too that a lot of these, I wouldn't call them younger because I'm turning 32 this year, but they're like in their young 20s. They're just, I wouldn't say instant gratification, but things have to go so quick. It's just like, oh, I like that. And then it's like, cool, I'm drinking that. And then I'm drinking something totally different. It's like, well, wait, don't you want to delve and dive deeper? And it's like, nope, I just need the next quick thing.
Yep.
And I think that's definitely hard. That's how a lot of marketing is done now. If your label isn't recognizable or good to look at, 3 to 5 seconds goes by, somebody's going to make a different decision. And that is such a quick amount of time.
It is. Yeah. It is. And I think I remember what I was getting at is like, I feel fortunate that we have this tasting room because initially we were doing all this distribution, right? But we opened the tasting room in 2016, 2017, right around there. And I never really put a lot of energy into it because it was primarily just like for tourists or people who wanted to buy bottles. I was just like, if we can sell bottles here, that's great. We need the space. Let's just be here and do that. But when this saturation thing happened, it's like, oh, we have a little throttle here. We just need to get people in the door. We sell beers across the bar, and this is like a way that we can keep things going. It's had its own challenges, but it feels nice to have an avenue to kind of point things in a direction, you know, because we've been finding success with like doing music and getting community events going, because I never really developed a local support, right?
Oh,
just because the people who were, you know, interested in this stuff were, you know.
Yeah, the people who knew.
Yeah, and they were from not necessarily Bend, you know, and so that it's nice to know. But I mean, I think if there's anybody starting a brewery who's listening to this, I would say, no matter what you're doing, have a strong local presence from day one. You know what I mean? Just culture it, because that is one thing. Like post-COVID, when we started running into this, it's like we get people literally 2 blocks over that'll walk by. I mean, this happened 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we've been here 7 years. How long you guys been here?
Oh, wow.
Seriously.
Wow.
You know, 7 years. Yeah. No way. I live 2 blocks over. I had no idea. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. Yeah. That's like, oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I like to think I'm good at the brewery part and the creative part, but boy.
You are.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. But the whole marketing and awareness, and I've struggled with social media. It really is not something that speaks to me. I'm really struggling. I think the algorithms are weird, you know?
Yeah, no, we can understand that.
Yeah, so those things are not, if I don't like to do it, right, I don't have it, you know, I have Connor. Connor's been with me for 11 years, and he's a great brewer, and he does most of the cellar work, and, you know, Stacy and I pitch in here at the taste room, but, like, when it comes to social media, there's sometimes I'm just like, don't even want to do it.
It definitely is. It's been, I know that for some people, especially breweries, like, we have several friends that do brewery social media. Like they help the brewers and breweries and owners do their social media because it is difficult. It is a full-time job, even though it doesn't seem like it. But like,
oh, it totally is.
you
Video
have
production.
to,
Come on.
you have to keep up with all that stuff, and there's a bunch of different things. And I mean, we're still learning and growing at it. And so one of the big things for us is we already talked about this, but like we want to help provide you some extra content that you didn't have to make.
Totally, yeah. This
and
is great.
So you're like, thank you so much.
Exactly.
So I mean, this is just another avenue to build that and to help you grow for sure. And I'm sure that the tasting room has been such a different form of outreach for you. I'm interested in hearing some about the features that you have.
All the artwork.
And the artwork
sure.
and different things. So I know we talked a little bit about, I don't even know what to call the canvases. Do you want to dive into that? Do you just call them the canvases? Like, do you have a name?
I guess we call them yeast prints.
Yeast prints?
Kind of like a spore print, like a mushroom or something like that. But so what they are, they're the muslin covers that we put over our fermenters during fermentation. And so when the yeast rises, it makes this circular imprint on the muslin. And then, when I first started pulling them off the fermenter, like we don't reuse them, right? I mean, that would not be the right thing. Right. And so I would store them because I was just like, I liked how they looked, but I really didn't know what to do with them. I kind of pinned some up in the brewery, but I just kept them because I was like, who knows? I just didn't want to throw them away. And then, once we started doing shows here, it's like, oh, this would be the coolest backdrop.
That is.
So, made this backdrop, and it's just been this wonderful way for people to ask questions and start people's curiosity, even people who are like not necessarily here for, nerding out on beer, right? They'll just be like, what? They won't have a clue what it is, but when you tell them, it'll start getting them asking other questions about the process or all that, which it's been fantastic.
Yeah. I think it is interesting even for someone, I don't feel like I'm a beer expert by any means, but I know a little bit. So I think even for me, like it's very interesting. And can you like tell the beers that they are, the different yeast because of the patterns? Like, do you see patterns in them or anything?
I wish what I would have done. I wasn't even thinking about it, but I wish I would have logged each brew.
Yeah, kind of like because that batch number.
Yeah, or just seasonal or whatever, because you can tell there's some of them are definitely darker.
Different.
And I don't know if that's just as simple as the wort that we were fermenting was darker. I mean,
the patterns.
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly.
That's very interesting.
Yeah,
it's probably like reading tea leaves, to be honest. But I don't know. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I like reading meaning into things.
That.
People come in here and find something.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How many of these do you think you have stored?
Well, that's 14. I've got another 15 in the back, and then we have a couple mounted, and I think I've got some up at the brewery too.
Oh, nice.
Very nice.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's so wild. And then some of the bigger installation pieces. Are these from local artists or from you or?
Oh yeah, so Chris Cole did the 3-panel piece up there. He's a local artist. He's a friend of mine, and so when we got the space, I asked him to do something, and so he did that. And just literally like a month ago, we did an art installation for him.
Oh, nice.
So this is all his art on the wall. And then he also does the kinetic sculptures. So like
nice.
Metal, the fish, like these things we could turn on and they move. And
oh, wow.
That's gorgeous.
It's really been amazing. And so like part of this transition with our tasting room is we've been doing these First Friday events, that are more community oriented. We do music and we do art typically. And so, trying to get people to come out to support our local artists, to hear local music, and it's like, one nice thing is we've sold a few pieces of Chris's because they've been on the wall.
Yeah.
I used to have, pictures of our process up here and our farmers, and it was all beer. And that's great for beer people, but to be able to have the art thing, for me personally, like there's a lot of beer stuff in here anyway. Yeah. This just adds this awesome other element that can trip people's brains out a little bit and, just make it a little bit bigger.
Oh, yeah. And it's gorgeous. I love the style, a lot of it. It reminds me of like almost like amoebic. It looks like organisms, but it's beautifully detailed.
Isn't it crazy?
So
yeah. And it's, again, like you talked about, like being involved in local community and art. I mean, you do music, you use art for beer as your medium. I think this is another great way to do it. And it always happens. I mean, now we see more like night markets, coffee pop-ups, that this is all like stuff that is like all coalescing, and everybody's realizing it's like, oh, we could use these spaces and have these really cool like fun events to go on, which I think is so rad.
Totally. And like, I mean, so when I started the brewery, one way that I was able to communicate what I was trying to do in terms of beer, that was a way to help people comprehend what I was thinking, because really, like, the way that I think back is like, and this is the case today too. Even most of our breweries, regardless if they're a large production brewery or a small pub brewery, from large part, they look the same, right?
Yeah.
They've got the same equipment, stainless, same process. It's just larger, maybe more automated. And I really wanted to make the brewer this almost an ingredient in the beer, right? Like it was really, and then the process, and really focusing on creating a process that was so unique. Because I learned this at Deschutes, right? We had 3 different brew houses. We were making the same beers on all these 3 brew houses in order to scale up to this large one. And the beers were so radically different, right? So just because of house character, right? And here, this was a clean brewery with a lot of the same procedures in place, and like all that was different was maybe the shapes of vessels, or maybe like one was gas fired, one was steam. There wasn't all that many differences, and it's like, so what I was thinking, like when I was making my brewery, I want to make something unique. How do I make my brewing process as unique as possible? Because that's going to drive in house flavor, right? It's going to be, it's going to create this element that's ours, and so that's why my brewery looks the way it does. That's why I mash an oak and I mash overnight. We have a copper kettle. And
gorgeous.
I mean, there's all these things that I tried to work in that are different. And so the blacksmith buddy who lives in town here, his name's Hunter Dahlberg, he runs Orion Forge. Like if you look at the legs of those tables, like he squishes those down.
Those are so cool.
And so like when I was starting my brewery and I was doing like these talks about like trying to explain who we were, I would bring up Hunter, because it's like, here's this guy. He takes metal, and with his physical strength and heat, like he is literally taking the energy from his body and putting it into this thing. And that's how we make beer here, right? Beer. Like we're taking our human energy and we're pushing it into this product, and it's unique because of that.
So, beautiful.
I don't know. It's just those kind of things inspire me. I think it's really cool.
I think it's so unique. Like it is only you, and only here, and only the brewery that you have, and the people that you have. Like it is so unique. That's
totally.
That. I mean, we haven't done a lot of podcasts yet, but we've been to a lot of breweries, and that's not something that they, they have so many breweries, but they don't talk about that. Like it is different because it is the person, and it's their energy that they're putting into it as well. So it's so unique. And
back to Prohibition, like this is where it all comes down. It's like you look at brewing cultures all around the world, they didn't have a freaking Prohibition. Right? And you look at their beer and where they went, and the creativity and brew houses and stuff, and a lot of them, especially the bigger ones, are going to have conformed to this idea of what a factory brewery, industrial brewery is. But the ones that didn't, like in Belgium or whatever, like Prohibition did serious damage to our craft as brewers, right? And so like before that, we had tons of small breweries, and for the most part, they all were so random and different, right? Like, because people didn't have the money or whatever, and they had to make their equipment, and more unique beers were all over the place. And then Prohibition happens, all the small breweries get shut out, and who can come back in are the big ones. And so then when time goes on, and here we go back in the 70s, 80s, and where like craft brewing revolution comes in, the only place we really have to look for like what we have is like these factory models. So it's like, just shrink that down, and it's cool. You can make great beer on pub systems. Like I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is like if you really want to explore fermentation and creative, flavors and ways to experiment beer from a place, like you really need to think about your brewing process in a way where you pull it out of the box.
Right.
Yeah, it makes it very distinct, and especially like beer regions. That's how a lot of our beer history is.
Right?
Is that literally every other county, especially over in Europe, there would be county lines, and one person, I think it might be Flanders if I'm remembering this correctly, one part of the county line does Flanders one way. The other part of the county line does Flanders another way, even though they're both called Flanders. But it's like, no, that's not Flanders. This is Flanders. And those are like the funny, unique quirks, but it makes it unique and different. And now I will say, it's easy to have, even on a smaller scale, people open up breweries that are nice, neat, and they look industrial. And it looks good. It's this nice, neat little package. But there's no variety. There's no character. And once you go, I mean, we've all been to a ton of breweries. You just see basically the same concepts over and over again, just different brandings and different brewers, and you're like, oh, okay, I would like something that would like spark my eye a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and those breweries, like to be perfectly honest, are great for lager.
Yeah.
And lager's wonderful.
Right.
But I there's this whole thing with lager now that I love lager. Like I don't want people to get the wrong impression about that. But lager homogenized our industry, right? And if we're chasing this thing like craft lager, we're leaving out like the major history of beer, this ale, the most expressive flavors and most unique process, and it's like, I don't know, it's like, it's a trip. How this stuff is falling out. Like, we really kind of have to like plant a flag and be like, no, I stand for this thing. You know what I mean?
Good.
Like, yeah.
That stuff survives history. That's the reason. I mean, it's a shame to think of how many historical beer recipes we lost because eventually nobody was willing to buy it or drink it. There were so many, like you said, all the macro lager and everything, all the domesticated lagers. We lost so much. And now people look back and like, damn, wish we would have saved those.
Totally.
I wish somebody would have wrote it down. I wish, that. And so I think it's perfect. I do think it's funny. We made a joke about this with Dave at Obelisk and Nathan at Obelisk about what is the difference between like a West Coast Pilsner, a hoppy Pilsner, and now like there's probably some other variant. I know at Steeplejack it's not a knock on them, but we had like a tropical Pilsner, a hoppy Pilsner, and a West Coast Pilsner. And other than some yeast variants, I was just like, wait, so are these just, they're hopped differently, they're hoppy Pilsners, but oh no, this one's more Northwest based. And I was just like, okay, so it's just name calling and changing different categories is how I felt about it. They were tasty, but it's getting so, it's just getting so stylized.
Yeah, I mean, it's a joke in a way, but like it's kind of going to this thing where beer is now IPA or Pilsner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Very
it's
much.
like that part's, and granted, I like both those beer
Yeah.
styles.
Yeah.
I just, sometimes it's a struggle because we get people in here who aren't familiar with the fact that there's this whole world, and
whole world.
which I took for granted for years, right? Like I just took for granted. We'd reach this stage with the craft brewing industry where it's like, oh, people who come into little breweries, right? They're ready to kind of check some stuff out.
Yeah.
And it just seems like we've kind of skipped back to this where people are going in. It's like, you got an IPA, you got a Pilsner? No, it's like, well,
Then
what
why
do
are
you
you a
even
brewery?
make?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are other things.
So wild.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I think for me, just I came in via. I think my first beer was a Dunkel was my first one, and I liked coffee, so I went the dark route, and I enjoyed all the stouts and brown ales and all the things. And then for me, like I remember trying my first sour and first. There's just
I think it was Goes at Seven Seas.
Yeah, and I but from then on, like I think there's just if you're open to it, there's so many different things to explore, and I think I've just enjoyed being able to be surprised by all the different flavors, and I also love wine and whiskey and other things, and so it's like fun to really be able to explore and not put a cap on just IPA or just lager. It's been fun to really. If you're open to it, to explore. And I think having a tasting room here, especially like in town, I'm sure that's helped out so much so people can come and taste stuff before they buy. And, and I think that's probably a huge thing that what maybe drove you opening the tap room of having some local presence, like you said, but then also giving a chance for people to open up their palate and
for sure.
Try different things and learn.
Yeah, and learn. And it's a pretty high bar when we were just making 750 ml bottles and nobody had the beer before. And it's like, can I try it? No, you got to pay like $25.
Yeah.
That's pretty high bar.
It's a trip. It's
Tasting
worth
room
it.
is great to be like, here, have a little splash pour,
Yeah.
I mean, it is fun to get people in here who come with their friends and they're like, either they say something like, oh, I don't like beer, or I don't like wild beers, or I don't like sours. It's like, hold on, let me just pour you a couple samples. Because generally speaking, we'll get somebody like, oh my gosh, this is amazing,
And that's so great when you see that.
So fun.
That's how I ended up. I went to a tasting room with my friends, and I was like, I don't really like beer. I usually drink wine, and so the bartender, beer tender, spent some time like having me try different things, and I found one that I liked.
Yeah.
And from then on, like I've now enjoyed a variety of beers since then. So that's huge. I think that's so important, and I'm glad that you have a little tap room that
for sure
can help people expand that palate that they didn't even know existed. Because I didn't know.
Yeah, and that goes to show you how important your beer tender is.
Yes.
I mean that person behind the bar is like so instrumental. And so it's like it's great to get people who are excited about beer and want people to share in that experience, you know, because it's like you're really only going to have as much fun as the person behind the bar is having.
100%.
You know, if they're having a bad day or they're not stoked on it, you're going to be like, I didn't get anything out of this experience, you know?
Yeah, the presentation, and I call it theatrics. I beer tended.
Nice,
I love the theatrics
Why
of
not?
it.
Yeah.
I beer tended when I was at Seven Seas. I was working at a Narrows Brewing as a beer tender, and so when she started on at the tap room, that was a lot of, she knew what she liked. She liked dark roasty stuff. She liked stouts and coffee stouts, and so she wasn't big into IPAs, but she at Seven Seas, when they onboard, they run you through the whole menu, and we had gozas. I think we had like some of our Oud Bruin on and things like that. So I was like, come down to Narrows, because when I wanted to get to know her.
Yeah, nice.
But I was like, let me tell you. So I would take her down to Narrows Brewing when she would get off, and I'd be beer tending and just give her like short little stints of being like, hey, this is like what I like heavily hot beer tastes like, or hey, this is what this tastes like, and the purpose behind it. And then after that, I think it was the brewed IPA. You're like, I think this is the IPA for me. That's when
there you go.
the brewed IPA, the flash in the pan happened.
Yeah,
But
not many people have those anymore.
I was stoked. I was like, yes. And it wasn't because it's like, oh, now you were going to drink IPAs. It's like, now you have this knowledge to tell other people and get them interested. And when people are like, oh, I never would have thought I liked this, but yes, can I have another? It's like, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I love the wild fermented beers so much. I think that's been like my favorite thing to like.
OJ Dan is one of my top 3 favorite beers that I've ever had.
Dang, dude, that's awesome. Do you remember where you had it?
I had got it from Pint Defiance in Tacoma.
Ron, right?
Huh?
That's Ron?
No, Ron. No, Barry and Renee ran that.
They actually
I know
live
Ron does
close to
Peaks and
Victoria
Pints.
Peaks and Pints.
Yeah,
Okay,
they're all kind of named
those
similarly.
guys, both those places have been good supporters of ours.
But I do remember I got it and I was super stoked. Went to my buddy Chris's house and he had just gotten back from a trip and had like some West Volterra, and I was like, we got to drink this, put it in the fridge for a little bit, because it had a tag on it that said, hey, you may want to like chill this for a second, because
totally.
it may. And sure enough, it did that. But I was still so excited, and it was so good. It was so beautiful. And that was a beer that you guys did for a friend, right?
Yeah, well, that one, I think we had a neighbor that was selling oranges for his baseball team.
Oh, okay.
And so we used the oranges the orange juice to bottle condition it with, I think.
Gotcha.
Wow.
I think that's what we did.
Yeah.
But what I remember about that beer was I think I put a Ray Carver poem on it, and it had this really cool drawing that my buddy Malachi came up with, this fisherman with one arm, and I don't know. It just was such a
it was
such
awesome.
a random beer.
It was so good.
Yeah.
I just remember the not only funky, but like just the brightness of like the citrus. I was like, dude, it's like you're cracking tangerines or satsumas right under your nose. It was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well,
for sure.
you guys have a great space down here next to Good Life, Good Life Brewing and Prost and Bend and things like that. And usually, I think the last little bit, we like to just give the floor to you if you have fun projects coming on or any fun dates coming up, you guys doing music, just let people know what to come to at Ale Apothecary here in Bend.
Yeah, it sounds like Nala has
I know
all
Nala has a lot to say.
I have things to say.
Tell us.
Well, we do First Friday events here.
Okay.
So if you're in Bend, First Friday events are really good. We do music and art and stuff. As far as beer goes, we're working on getting an arrangement where we can maybe deliver Ale Club memberships to people in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
That's always been kind of an issue because, right, obviously, you'll probably find this when you talk to other breweries, is like shipping beer is a bit of a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And especially for a brewery like mine, that would be immensely helpful, right? If I had the same, if the law applied to me like a winery, I could ship to people across the country.
Yeah.
It would be really awesome. Unfortunately, that's not an option right now, but having this relationship with our distributor in Washington, we may have a way to deliver beer direct to consumers up in Seattle for our Ale Club. So we're trying to put that together.
Perfect.
Connor, my assistant, is working really hard to finish our packaging for our Ale Club beers. And we have this one, it's a blackberry, our Be Still, I don't know if it's our sour stout. Usually we put it in a claret bottle and we serve a barrel still, but this one with the blackberries, we're actually going to carbonate it. It's just phenomenal. I'm super excited about it. So I won the bottle like a couple days ago. Trying trying to think what else. I think really just trying to get through winter.
Yeah.
We have kind of the snow kind of affects how we can load
True.
trucks and stuff.
Yeah.
'cause that's kind
Thanks
of,
a lot of brewery operations.
so we're really, we got the new food truck here. So we got some Italian street food going on. And, the Little Star, which you guys are drinking, was a collaboration we did with this brewery called Old Standby, run by Ryan Holt. He's out of Salem. He doesn't actually have a physical brewery space, but what he does is he works with other breweries to produce beers that raise money for charities.
Oh, awesome.
Which is great. So this beer raises money for our local Bethlehem Inn, a homeless shelter. We can't put that on the label or anything because, they didn't want to have it associated with alcohol and all that.
Okay.
But that's why I call it
Understandable.
Little Star. Little Star Bethlehem.
That's awesome.
And so we're getting to the point where we're almost running out of that.
It's beautiful, by the
right?
way.
Isn't that beer
So
awesome?
lovely.
It's really good. So that was one of these new for us, a new foray into maybe a little bit more affordable beer, a little bit more competitive price point. So it's like we brewed in our Cylinder Chronicles. We brewed a fairly rustic saison with saison yeast, and then blend in some of our wild beers and barrel aged with heather. So it's like it's a kind of this hybrid, right? So it's like for people who are into saisons, it might be a way to be like, oh, maybe you'll like some of our wild beers. But so those are some little news tidbits.
Awesome.
Nice. Love that. Very exciting. And we'll be in Bend for the next few weeks, and so we'll have to come check out.
Oh yeah, we'll have to check out First Friday.
We haven't been
for
to one
sure.
yet, so we'll have to do that before we kick out of Bend. So that'd be awesome.
Yep. And I guess one other thing I should say is like the website is I'm trying to keep our events lined up on there. So if you're listening to this and you want to know, check our events tab on
the website as opposed to like Instagram.
Totally.
Okay,
Yep,
perfect.
Exactly. Instagram is very spotty.
That's totally okay. Well, we appreciate the time,
thank
Paul.
you so
No, this is
Seriously,
great.
this
Nice
is a
getting to know
blast.
you guys
So
this
nice
way.
to meet
Yeah,
you.
and we'll be around.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Yep.